today, configuring the Windows Server 2008 environment, which is similar to configuring the Windows 7 environment, configuring the Windows 2003 server environment, all of those things. What we're talking about is what we can do in the system itself. This is managing the server, not managing the network, the device itself, the operating system itself. So the learning objectives here are use Server Manager and ServerManagerCmd.exe to manage the server. Server Manager, the GUI, ServerManagerCmd.exe, the command line command to do the Server Manager stuff. Some of you asked, what should you install, which means that you hadn't read the lab. But if you installed the core, then you're going to have to use the server command, ServerManagerCmd.exe, because you're not going to have a server manager because there is no GUI there. And that one is honestly a good one to look at to see what's going on. And again, in the way that Microsoft likes to ask you about things, they like to focus on new stuff. Core is new stuff. Server Command exe is new stuff. And I think in the lab they have you do some Server Manager, put some stuff on, take some stuff off. Generally, I don't like to do those, but then put it back on with the command line. You really need to know about those. The command prompts, the command line commands are good when you need to script things or when you're using the core. Install and remove server roles, that's really a toughie. You just add server roles, check whatever you want to do. When you do this, they've gotten a lot smarter. When you do this, if there are other roles that are required to do these things, when you get into printing, Internet Printing Protocol will require IIS. It'll say, hey, you want me to add this for you because you're going to need it. Just take the supporting roles. It'll pick the elements that you need for those. Configure server hardware, we can do some of this. There are some things that we can't do because of the limitations, and actually not many limitations, of virtualization. We can do some configuration. One of the ones that I like to do on the virtual machines, as long as you've got an IDE drive or a serial ATA drive, as well as on the physical machines, is the write-ahead caching. Do you actually need to wait until everything is actually saved on the hard drive, slows things down a little bit? If you enable it, you do take a chance. If the machine crashes, then you may lose some information. But to me, it's kind of worth the risk. Configure the operating system. They're going to have you go through a couple of things, and some of the stuff we did in Windows 7. You can see that the operating systems, when you go through these things, the operating systems are very, very, very similar. The difference between a workstation and a server mostly is how many people can be connected to it and how many services can you add to that particular operating system. Put more stuff on a server. In Windows 7, the client, there's no DNS server. There's no DHCP server service to add to these things. Now, there are third-party things that you can always get to run on those things, but you have the ability to run those things in the server portion. Understand and configure the registry. Take a look at the registry. I think I say in the lab, yep. If you're going to do it, that's okay. Please make a copy of it, back it up before you fool with the registry. To me, this is an area where you can really get in trouble because there are just so many places. If you, actually we haven't used it. We have a piece. I have a piece of software we have to use in the Server 2003 frequently called NewSID, which replaces the security ID, and it goes through the registry. You can watch that thing, just the number of registry changes that it makes in order to do that. It's like, okay, could you have done that on your own? Well, I certainly couldn't have. The registry may have things in several different locations. The good thing about the registry is a strength and a weakness at the same time. Central point of management. central point of infection. A lot of times a virus or something, it affects the registry, and you have to go in and actually delete it. And a lot of times you can't do it until you go outside of Windows. Windows has a hard time changing things frequently that are in use. If you need to edit it, go ahead and do it. Make a backup of it before you do edit it, because it could be an issue if you do it wrong. You may be able to fix your system to where it won't work. Has anybody ever had that opportunity with a registry? Yep. Be careful. Take a look at it, but be careful. Remember, when you go into regedit, which is the one that they have you use, when you type something in there, there is no save as. You just made the change. So look at it. Be careful about the things you change. Now, there are times that you're going to need to do that, but you're probably going to get some very explicit, this is how you're going to do that. Use a security configuration wizard to harden your system. I think we talked about that a little bit the last time, because they talked about it, that it is there. It's kind of sort of new, but kind of sort of not new. It was available in the later versions of Server 2003. It's available now. This allows you to harden your system. Harden the server means that we only expose the ports, the services that need to be exposed in order to do the job of the server. And as you add services to it, you're going to have more ports that are open, more things that you're going to do with it. This is handy in that Windows still isn't very good. They're better, but they're not as good as you might want them to be in as far as which services get installed by default. What this does is allow you to go through a wizard and tell the wizard what services you want to be exposed on that server, and then it only opens up those ports. It'll shut down services for you. It is a handy thing. It has actually simplified creating what's called bastion hosts in Windows. Install and use the Windows PowerShell. It's not installed by default. You're going to have to turn it on. PowerShell is a more powerful scripting program. It's kind of like a super DOS or a super command prompt. It has a lot more power. Server Manager. So I feel like we've done this, and we have, because they said this in the other ones, in the new stuff. Server Manager is new in Server 2008. When you, and I want to backtrack, I guess, a little bit on the core. Once you get the core installed and get the core configured, you can manage it remotely with all of the administrative tools. You just don't have those administrative tools on the core because there is no GUI. There is no Windows Explorer on it. There is only the command prompt. And if you close the command prompt and you go to start, you have one option, and that's the command prompt. It is a lot less risky. It's a lot more efficient. It doesn't need as much hardware and much memory, because it doesn't have to run all this overhead in order to make it easy for us to do. It's there. A lot of people like to configure it for whatever reason. I think that if you're exposing something to the internet, it's probably a really good thing, because it does have a much smaller attack surface. And then you can use the security configuration wizard in order to further reduce the attack surface, but that's enough of that. Server Manager consolidates the administrative function, and they've been trying to consolidate administrative functions since NT4. NT4 had all these different things that you could do that ran in little individual management tools. And then in 2000 and 2003, we had the MMC, where we could take those individual tools and put them together. What they've done here is done a lot of that, put that all in one package for you. The add roles function is back to the old Windows Server 2003 and Windows XP and Windows 2000. add remove Windows components in the add remove programs. You don't do that there anymore. You do that through the Server Manager. The roles summary feature displays the log information, what's installed. You put roles on and take roles off at the same location, and the log information, what's going on with it. If it's got a problem, if that particular role has a problem. Left panel, roles, the features and the diagnostics. The right panel, server summary, and you'll see that as you go through the labs. Take a look at that. This is a handy function of what goes on these things. We have roles and features. If something doesn't show, a role is like a major, whatever we're going to do, a major component of it. DNS, DHCP, Windows Distribution Server, part of Active Directory. Active Directory, when you get there, Active Directory says you have to have the binaries installed, which you're supposed to do through here. But if you just run the DC promo, it'll fix that for you. It won't let you do it. It won't say, oh, no, you can't do this. You just want to do that. Features, when you put things like PowerShell in, it's going to be a feature. So there are features and roles, roles being major components, features being kind of supporting parts of it. The diagnostics are here, configuration and storage, major parts of these things are here in the Server Manager. And this thing will start for you automatically until you tell it not to. It doesn't show up here, but there should be a checkbox on here is don't start this every time I start. It's actually not a bad thing to start, and then just go ahead and let it start, and then you'll just get a shortcut in the taskbar, and it's always there. If you turn it off, it's in Administrative Tools. It's not like it's going to go away. It's there. It's just a matter of whether it's running or not. If you don't want to be bothered with it popping up every time, tell it not to open every time you start, and if you need it, just go to the, and after you get to initial configurations, then you probably don't want this to open every time that you start the server. Actions panel, shown when drilling down into functions, and then the activity, get to know your server manager, and here it is in Administrative Tools, Server Manager. It's got a whole bunch of stuff on it. Active Directory is installed on this. A number of other things are already on this server, but this is just to show that Server Manager is there. If you tell it not to start every time, it's not going to go hide from you. Administrative Tools, good place to have things. Installing and removing roles, file server, print server are roles that need to be added. I think that if you look at your server after it's installed, that the file server probably is installed by default. Print server isn't, and then in Chapter 6, I think, is printing, which we'll do next week. You'll add the print server role and share printers through server in it. Roles change over time. Installing and removing 2 server roles. This is the one that they have you do it in the GUI as well as at the command line. You need to know about the command line stuff, A, to be able to do it, and B, before you go test. And yeah, you really should consider doing some of these cert tests. Microsoft ones, you guys that had CCNA have looked at that. CCNA is, if you start at CCNA, you probably started at the most difficult one. The CompTIAs are kind of in the middle, I think, along with the Microsoft ones. They're certainly passable. They don't have the labs yet anyway. They finally got them in the XP in the 2003, but they don't have the labs like Cisco does. They have mostly just the questions that you should be able to do. When you study, this is the commercial. When you start studying these things and you start doing the test banks, don't try to memorize the questions. Guarantee you they're going to change 3 words in it that's going to change the whole meaning of the question. When you come up, go do it. You've got a machine. If you need another virtual machine, we can do that. Go do these actions so that you understand what they're kind of asking, because it's not always clear. Go set up the scenario and see what happens with them. And that's, to me, the way that you're really going to use these things. The Server Managercmd.exe is the server command, or the Server Manager at the command line. Run parameters in an XML answer file, or you can put, it's got switches, and it's like all other things Microsoft. Use the help file. Use the help file as you go through these things. The activities, install, remove roles, determine, install roles and features, use the what if option, restart the computer, specify features to install with the role, and use the XML-based answer file to install and configure roles. The XML-based answer file, of course, you're going to have to write the XML answer file. It's not like they're going to say, here you go. But what I have found, honest to goodness, is if you get kind of good at your friend and mine, Google, you can find an awful lot of this stuff out there. Perl course. Microsoft has a whole page, hundreds of Perl scripts that you can use with Windows to do different things, to monitor it, to change it, to do all sorts of stuff. And part of that course is not that you're necessarily going to go create everything in the world, but that you can get something and to modify it for your own use. You can find some of these other files out there also. Execute from the command line, nothing magic about that. Access the command prompt from the administrative account. And the way you access the command prompt from the administrative account is right-click on it, run as administrator. If you get into the command prompt and it says you got to have elevated privileges, that means that you got to right-click on the command prompt and start it as the administrator. That's just really just right-click, run as administrator. Roles and features are identified by IDs, and this is one of the things. And this is where handbooks kind of come in handy. What are the commands? What are the IDs? What do you actually need to put into this thing in order to do that? And this is in the book. Some of the options that are available in the server command.exe. And the ID, I guess nothing really all that magic about application-server, but you got to get these things right. You got to put the dash in if it calls for a dash. If it's got a space, you got to put the space in. If it doesn't have a space, don't put the space in. Terminal-services, print-server for print services, those things, web dash. The reason I think that the dashes are there is typically the command prompts don't really like spaces a whole lot. You can either use a dash or an underscore in those things. That's why people we used to have a network administrator who loved underscores. I personally hate underscores because they're hard to type. If I had been doing this, I would have just used the camel case without the space, with the capital P and the capital S and server. But they didn't ask me. But when you start doing things on your own, if you want the dashes, okay. But just remember, when you start typing these things, they really are harder to type. And if you put spaces in, sometimes they're really harder to see. Configuring the hardware, both plug and play and add hardware wizard is used. The add hardware wizard actually should be rare because I think about everything that you're going to get today is going to be plug and play, and it's going to operate as plug and play pretty well. Including the hard drives. You add the hard drive and it'll go through churn, and finally says, oh, your hardware is ready, even on the server, just like it does on the workstation. Hardware, disk drives, disk controllers, network adapters, CD drives, keyboards, pointing devices, monitor, all those things. If you want to take things out, don't take your disk drives out. Take things out in your virtual machine, you can do that. You can uninstall it, restart it, reinstall it. Honest to goodness, the easiest way to do it is uninstall and then right-click at the top in the device manager and say find new hardware. And it'll go find it and install the drivers for you. That sometimes, particularly on the virtual machines, if the NICs get all confused, and they do occasionally, I'll just take it out and start over. Sometimes just take the hardware out because the configuration gets flustered or confused or whatever. Take it out, put it back in. Sometimes that'll fix it, sometimes that won't fix it. Plug and play. Most of you guys don't remember when plug and play was really plug and pray, do you? Windows 95 introduced it, but there wasn't enough plug and play hardware at the time. And remember, for plug and play to work, what do you got to have? This is your turn now. What do you got to have? What makes plug and play work? Send you back to DOS, huh? Huh? have enabled on your BIOS, you have to have a BIOS that supports plug and play. That's one. There's 3 things. That's one. So we're a third of the way there. What's another one? The drivers are there. How about a plug-and-play device? And what's the third one? Back related to drivers, what about a plug-and-play operating system? If you put DOS in, is it going to work very well with plug-and-play?
No.
Or Windows 3.11?
No.
Or Windows NT 4.0? Windows NT 4.0 was kind of a weird one, honestly. Some stuff they said was plug and play, some stuff wasn't plug and play, but you had to actually manage everything manually with that operating system, except for some video cards. See why we get so confused. But now, we've all grown accustomed, me too. I didn't trust it for a long time, but now, Windows 7, Windows 2008, pretty smart. When you put that printer in the other day, on the IP address on the Windows 7 machine, assuming that you did that lab, what did you do? To add a printer. What are you going to do? 10.60.64.20. Communicate with the printer, and it goes and says, okay, printer, what are you? And the printer said, here's what I am. It said, oh, okay, I can go find that driver, and it put the correct driver in for you. 2008, the server's not going to do that much for it. It's going to communicate with it, and it comes up with a limited range. You have to actually tell it which driver. And the lab, when you get to that lab, the lab will tell you which one to pick. I tried it out. It does work. Plug and play. Ha-ha. So here are the answers. Must be built into the device, enabled into BIOS, built into the operating system kernel. So we got to have a plug-and-play device, plug-and-play BIOS, and a plug-and-play operating system in order for this thing to work. And the new ones really do work well. Linux works well too, doesn't it? Doesn't it not, all of you Linux guys?
Everything but the wireless card.
Everything but the wireless card. Yeah, there are a few things. Well, because it supports a limited set of wireless cards, and it really does. But most of this stuff, and that's why when you go buy a device, you're going to look, see that it's certified for whatever. That goes back to the hardware compatibility list or the Windows catalog, now named the Windows catalog. What's there? And if it is there, it's going to work a lot better with the operating system than maybe some other things. If just because it's not there, it doesn't mean it's not going to work well with it. But if it is there, you shouldn't have any issue with it. If you need to use the Add Hardware Wizard, manually launch plug and play, manually install without plug and play, troubleshoot problems with existing hardware. It's hard to install stuff anymore that doesn't support plug and play, because plug and play was really, when we started with the PCI bus, I think, and you can't get anything with the old ISA stuff in it anymore because they don't even make that bus, which is good for us. But you would have to add those things. Some PCI was still that way. If you got some really old stuff, you'll have to add and go tell it what it's actually using. But the Add Hardware Wizard, what I use this mostly for is in labs and then trying stuff out where I can just lie to Windows and tell it it's there, and it's really not. Although, it's getting smarter, because in this Windows 7 class I tried to lie to it until I had a wireless card. I said, okay, you got a wireless card, but I have a driver, so I'm not going to give you any configuration information about it. So it is getting a little bit better in those things. Control panel, you see that? This one is not at, well, this is the, kind of shows up originally as the not category view of this thing. Same things that you would see in Windows 7 basically, and you just see them more better, I think, in here. The power options, the printers, problem reports, all those things. Windows Update, Windows Firewall, and oh, by the way, the problem that we had with you got the note that had with the server is when he joined it to the domain, it decided it should turn the firewall on for the domain. I looked at it, so the firewall's off. Nice big red block said the firewall's off. Yeah, except you got to turn the firewall off in 3 locations. and it had been turned on for the domain. That's why we were having trouble connecting. That's why I just said, who are you? Everything else worked until you actually try to get to the control port. Device Manager, IRQ, nice words. I don't think that they'll ask you about this. This is more a function of the A+ course here than it is this one. IRQ is an interrupt request. What this is a communication. It's kind of like a phone line. Some of you guys have been in the military. You've had drop lines, right? Where you pick it up and it goes to some specific individual at the other end. Drop line. That's kind of what this is. Because if you pick up or if you use that particular drop line, that particular connectivity is going to go to this device. And if you use another one, it's going to go to another device. Just like the drop line, you push the button, whichever drop line you use is whoever's going to answer it, whoever you at least expect the answer on the other end. But that's what IRQs are. Resource conflicts, one of the things that plug and play gives us the ability to do, and IRQ sharing gives us the ability to do, is put more resources on a system in order to do that. But IRQ is the interrupt request. Some of them are predetermined. You can see the IRQs and what's assigned to each IRQ if you look around in the device manager and change the way that you see things. As you initially set up, you just see the devices. You can also look at the resources if you look at the properties of that also to see what's using what parts of it. Control panel, disable device, uninstall device, one of, at least in the question banks, or at least in, used to be one of Microsoft's favorite questions, or I guess the question bank writer's favorite questions is, you have a video card or something, or a NIC or a whatever, or a NIC that's a 10 megabit NIC that keeps showing up, and you only want your 100 megabit NIC to show up. What do? If you uninstall a device that's plug and play, as soon as you reboot the machine, it's going to install itself again. If you want things to not work and hardware profiles, you may want to do this. Disable the device. It's still there, it's just not functional. I had that problem with some old machines at home. The floppy drives, when was the last time you used a floppy? I still have machines with floppies in them. But it kept causing issues. Since I wasn't using it, I just disabled it. It is still there, but Windows doesn't care about it. So disable device can help you do those things. And then the activity, please do these activities as you go through them. What's a problem, what's not a problem. I think generally, generally you're not going to have a big issue here. As I was telling myself, I had a problem at home with a printer. It just kind of would sometimes and kind of wouldn't sometimes. It was really odd. If you go through if I went through the troubleshooting software that came with it, printed a test page just perfectly. But then I would print a page out of software, and sometimes it'd get a little bit of a faint print on it. Sometimes it'd print this nice blank page. Problem wound up was couldn't find this driver. Go through, then this is Windows 7 and smarter, I think smarter software. Go through the troubleshooting part of the software of the Windows, and it says, I don't have a driver for that printer. Let me go fix it for you, and it will go fix it for you. It's just like when I plugged in using this Bluetooth stuff to record these things. Plugged in the dongle, it didn't have the driver. The headset didn't have the driver. It went and found all that stuff for me. I didn't actually have to pick it. I just had to let it go do its thing. Driver signing has become a bigger deal. And when you do the add printers or add devices, and I think we saw that in Windows 7 also, the drivers that are there are going to have like a little tablet next to them. That means that they are a signed driver, a digitally signed driver, which says that you have an assurance that it came from who it claims to be from. Does it mean that nothing's happened to it? Well, probably. But all it means is this is who the originator is. Does it mean that the originator is the correct person? No, because the Iranians, you remember last year the Iranians went and got some digital certificates from somebody that they weren't supposed to be, or actually they were faking digital certificates, building digital certificates to say that they were like a Gmail provider or a Yahoo mail provider or whatever else, so that you would trust them. And that's what the certificates allow you to do, is to establish a trust with wherever that came from. You see things in a little bit different. On the internet, when you download stuff, it says it has an MD5 hash. Well, that's really good as long as you check the hash. We had an instructor here a few years ago, downloaded a piece of software, absolutely legal, open source, installed it, and gave a whole room a virus. It had an MD5 hash. Well, did you get something to check the hash to be sure that it hadn't changed? What are you talking about? Well, the hash says that this is what it was, and then you run another piece of software and get your own hash to compare the two to see if they're the same. Digital signatures kind of give you some assurance like that. Digitally signed emails. Why are they better than unsigned emails? Because a digitally signed email says that it was sent from a machine, at least, that had the certificate, the private key of that user, so that it puts a certificate on it that says, yes, I'm who I, yes, it's who it says it's from. The system file checker scan the file systems for integrity. This is to scan the operating system files for integrity. You can also check for unsigned drivers. One of the things that Microsoft might do to you, and I'm saying things they might do to you, and a lot of this is hearsay, if you call them up and spend the $250 for a trouble call, and they're not cheap, and you have some unsigned drivers, that might be their way out. Not supported, unsigned driver. Not supported for this or not supported for that. The system file checker scans the system files for integrity, and this can be a handy thing. Won't boot, can't boot, and that's all kind of part of the repair part of this thing. And none of these things are really all that difficult, as you know. Command prompt, SFC, system file check, scan now, verify file, scan file. Verify only whatever you want to do with it to do these things. So you can verify a file, a specific file, and they're verifying the kernel 32.dll in this particular one, and these images should all be in the book. New things that are available, actually system file check was available, and it has been available for some time, but it allows you to check the operating system. Sigverif, and don't put too many letters in here, to verify system and critical files, only scans the files, doesn't overwrite inappropriate files, and then all these activities are the ones in the book to look at. And I think that if you go through the labs, I ask you a couple of questions, what did you see here, because you really need to do these activities. I'll just answer the questions. So I've been going through and writing my own questions. Your files have been scanned and verified as digitally signed. If you do this on the Sigverif on a Windows Server 2003 server, I think that you're going to find a number of files that aren't digitally signed. They've gotten a little bit better at what is and what isn't. Digital signatures really have become a big deal as more and more and more people try to get more and more and more things, trying to fool you, trying to send you stuff that's not valid. Digital signatures. It's digitally signed emails, and it kind of amazes me that, and maybe companies do, but it kind of amazes me that more companies don't use digitally signed emails. The reason you don't get digitally signed emails from me is because they won't go out of our server, and we've been having a little discussion about that. But you may want to consider that yourself, because if somebody steals your address list and sends an email from you without the digital signature, because they can't sign it unless they have your private key, which is going to be stored in your profile on the machine. That goes back to why did I want you to be able to export your certificates in Windows 7, because if you do that, you need to export that certificate. In case the server crashes, you can put it back in and you can continue using those things, as well as if you're doing encryption, decrypt information. The operating system optimize the performance to meet the specific requirements, and when they do this, that sounds like you got a whole lot of options. You got like 2 options, programs and background services. That's it. Depending on what the server does. If it's primarily running programs like ours is, the program that it's running is the virtual server service, then we configure ours for programs. If you're doing background services, then you want to configure a background services, printers, things like that. Performance options, some stuff that we have already looked at, kind of, sort of, processor scheduling, memory use, but the performance, video performance for one thing, and the servers that you'll notice are already configured to have most of all of the fancy stuff turned off. The server already has a plain blue background. When you get your servers installed, pitch here, please be sure you put the VM additions, put the tools on it, because it's going to be really miserable until you do that. But virtual memory, how much should you have? By default, Windows gets to manage it. It was kind of interesting when we put this server in with a 96 gig of memory. It made a 96 gig page file. Now that's one server, one machine that you probably wouldn't need a very big page file with all that memory. But it did it anyway. And when we got done, he said, "Where'd all my disk space go?" Well, all your disk space went to page file. Manage the page file. The rule of thumb, and they go back to it in this book, the rule of thumb in NT4, rule of thumb in Windows 2000, kind of rule of thumb went away with XP in 2003, now it's kind of come back. The rule of thumb is 1.5, 1 to 1.5 times physical RAM should be the page file. If you set the min and the max to the same, 1 times physical RAM, for instance, then you don't have to worry about the page file growing and shrinking, and you also don't have to worry about a discontiguous page file. It'll be a contiguous page file where you wouldn't have to do a defrag on it. Kind of what you want to do is defrag the disk, make it go away, set it, reboot the system so that it creates the page file in a contiguous disk space. If you have the option of putting the page file on a different physical disk, that's where it should go. By default, they go on the system disk, not the best place, because you're going back to the operating system. If you use the disk channel to go to the operating system and to the page file to emulate memory, then you're using the same disk channel for all of that stuff. Processor scheduling data, the execution prevention, the backup services, the background services, and the programs to configure those things. The data execution prevention, same thing we had in Windows 7. This one, I think Windows 7 was only the Windows-only files. This one is everything except what I list below. Server, a little bit more restrictive as we do those things. Turn on depth for all programs and services with the exception of what you do there. Same concept, same basic thing that we did with Windows 7, except I think Windows 7 had a different default. Configuring virtual memory, they got an exercise to do that. You know what a page file is. Linux has them, Windows has them. Swap file, page file, same file. The background services or programs, and this is also where we're going to configure the virtual memory advanced, and down here in the virtual memory change it. You have to set it in order for it to change. The system has to reboot, which kind of makes sense because it's making a physical change to the disk. But you will have to reboot these things up here. The visual effects, same ones that we did in the Windows 7 machines, except Windows 7 said make it look pretty. This one's going to say it's got like 2 things checked in the let me do my own thing. You won't get a whole lot. You won't get nearly as much change in that one as you do in the XP machine. The big thing that you're going to get, the big bang for your buck you're going to get in these virtual servers is when you put the VM additions on it. Direct memory access to hard disks, I think I said one time before, I don't think I'd ever seen it. Most of these DMA are floppies. Well, in this one and in the disk that you're installing it on, which is an IDE disk, an IDE and ATA disks, you can configure them for DMA, and they've got an activity that you go in and do DMA, turn DMA on. I think you're probably going to find it's already on. Direct memory access, which means that you don't have to use the processor in order to get to these things. Direct access to memories should speed things up. But this is one of the configurations that can make the system more efficient. Environmental variables, there's one to look at those and what are the defaults. You're going to get a drop-down box in there, and you're only going to have one thing in there, Server 2008. If you had more than one operating system, a dual boot environment, you would pick in this area which one you want to start. And how long you're going to wait before it starts, how long it's going to show the menu. I used to have a machine that had, I think, 3 operating systems on it. Of course, I would turn the computer on and walk away, and then it'd start the wrong, not the operating system that I wanted, because it's going to start the default operating system. What are the defaults? What's your path variables are all going to show up in here. But take a look at that one. I think that is one of the activities. What are the variables? What are the default variables? And this is an area that if something isn't working right, you know you start it and it doesn't start, you may need to look at your path variables to see what's happened in here. They did in this room, I don't know, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, did a Perl class. And it did all the really cool installing of Perl, except that it didn't put the path variable in. So to start it, you had to go to the location to run the executable. You had to go to the disk, to the directory that it was in. But you can change some of those things. The startup options, the default operating system, a list of operating system recovery options. And one of the recovery options, the default is to, if you have an error, to reboot the system. That's where you can get into the just reboot. And you have a real hard time reading the error message when you get to blue screen. You may want to configure servers or even Windows 7 machines to stop on errors so that you can see what they are, see if you can fix the problem. Writing a system log can be disabled, and it is going to say things for you that you can send to Microsoft if you have the inclination and the dollars. And if it's a big server, you're probably going to want to send the error log that gets created in here. It's actually the error log, and then there's a memory dump. The memory dump to Microsoft so they can tell you what's going on if you need to, if it's worth doing that with. And this is the window that you're going to see, this drop down here. You got default operating system. If you have more than one, this is where you would pick the default. Time to display the list of operating systems, 15 seconds. If you turn this off, it just sits there forever. Time to display the recovery options when needed, and you notice this is turned off by default. Automatically restart, you may or may not want to do that on system failure. The kernel dump, right, debugging information of the kernel dump, and then the dump, where the dump files are going to be located. You can change the location here. Percent system root, percent, where are you going to go? And you have to put this in variable format in order to send it someplace. Power options. We've looked at power options again. One of the probably issues that you really don't want to do is require a wake-up password. A number of you got the screensaver to make it a security device, turned on the screensaver, but you didn't check the checkbox to require a password. Not everybody, it's a number of you, but in order to make that effective, you've got to do the checkbox to require the password. Similar thing here. What are you going to do? Are we going to just let it come back up or require a password when it comes back on? Choose a power button function, and this is what's going to happen when I push the power button. Shut down, hibernate, nothing, whatever you want to happen there. You can create your own power plan. You can modify an existing power plan. this is kind of a big one. I'm not sure it's as big a deal as it was when we were using CRTs, but turn the monitor off. Probably want to do that. These, but these don't just go off. These go into screensaver mode with a require password to get back onto the system. So they do get locked. The drop down, the balance, and we got to balance the high performance and the save power saving options in these things. Require password on wake up, yes, no option, and what you're going to do into these things. Take a look at hard disk, because there are some power options that will turn your hard disks off. Do you want to do that? I don't want to answer that question for you, but keep in mind every time that you turn that hard disk off, the heads crash. And the default, I think, is to turn them off 60 minutes or something like that. You can look and see what it is. And it's different on the workstation than it is on the servers. Server, do you ever want the disks to spin down? Maybe, maybe not. But again, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but just keep in mind that that's one of the things that's in here. One of the other things that doesn't show up here but is in here somewhere is the NICs. By default, the brand new spanking Windows installs are configured to let Windows turn this NIC off to save power. You may want that on, you may want that off. Up to you. Just be aware that that is the default, to allow Windows to manage the NIC and turn it off to save power. Don't know how much power a NIC takes, but I can't imagine it takes that much. Huh? How much can it take? I don't know, but that's the default. That's one of the issues that we have in this room with these machines and with this operating system. We have to go back and manually configure it to say no. Because then if you want to manage it remotely, you got to send it a magic packet. And it has to be configured to allow the magic packet to wake it up. And yeah, that's what it's called, is the magic packet. Installing a protocol, virtual network switch protocol using a Hyper-V role. These are things that are there. Take a look at them. The default protocols are on by default TCP/IP. There are others that can be added if you need them. Take a look at what is available. Reliable multicast, and then they're going to have you look at those things. Protocol, add protocol. Clients and the services, what's available. Kind of handy to know what's available in case you need to use it. The registry, I don't want to talk a whole lot about, except that it's a database, dangerous place. Go do your own editing. If you're going to do your own editing, please make a backup copy of it before you do your own editing, so that you can restore that backup copy from one of the recovery options. Also keep in mind that if you do this and mess it up, that you may be able to get back from the last known good configuration. Keeping in mind that every time you log on to Windows, that the system makes a clone set of the registry configuration and stores it there. And that's when you start beating on the F8 key when you start the system, the last known good configuration. Last known good configuration is the registry settings the last time that you actually successfully logged on to the computer. That can be handy. A lot of people forget about that one. It's just, oh, I'm going to safe mode. Well, safe mode will work too, but last known good may actually get you there quicker. The minimum administrative effort question. Those are the ones that I love. I got three different answers that are all right. And what's the least administrative effort? Well, your least administrative effort might not be my least administrative effort, but you've got to do those things. Regedit 32 is a little bit different than regedit, and you may want to, if you have never looked at this thing, you may want to take a look at this one. It's one that allows you to, it by default is read-only. You have to tell it that you want to edit the registry, which makes it a little bit safer than just the regedit, because regedit, you're in edit mode. Regedit 32, and regedit 32 allows you to change permissions on the registry keys if you need to do that. So there are a number of things. If you haven't, and you've obviously been in there, Jason, it's a little different than just the regedit that we've been familiar with forever. Take a look at that one. And again, I don't really want to do, I want you to look at it, know what's there. I don't really want you to go and changing the registries on these things. They always want you to do something with them. Oh boy, there you go. What you'll be surprised is some of the stuff that goes into it, and it does get bigger and bigger and bigger. One of the things, I don't know if they've taken it out, that used to be in there was all of your internet history. Why? But some of the things that are there, you might be surprised, and those are things that you might want to delete. When they first came out with this thing, they implied that it would fix itself, so I tried it out. It won't fix itself. If you delete the registry, just reinstall. If you mess up the registry, just reinstall. Unless you made your own copy, and this don't go from one machine to another. It ain't gonna work very well. Don't try to copy from one to the other. Back it up. Edit registry as last resort. Yeah, as the last resort. After the last resort, edit the registry. Keys, subkeys, and entries go into here. HKey local machine, current user, users is a list of users there. Classes root. This is the file association, the file classes. What application is going to open what extensions. And HKey current config, whoever is currently on the machine. And you can look at those things. I guess the term I just went past it. The term that you know about is in hives. You need to know that term. Okay, contains information about the desktop setup, current user, what's going on with these things. Take a look at that. Again, I don't really want to go into personally. I want you to know that it's there. I want you to know that occasionally you have to edit it, and if you have to edit it, please have some complete path of where you're going to go. Typically, you're going to do that to make this go away. You may have to edit it to get rid of a virus or something like that.
The device with the local machine, I had to edit the delete entry for the DVD drive.
Yeah.
And so many registries, and like they were all the same. It was like 30 digits except for the last one. And that last digit was different, or the middle one was different. Having to read through each one to find the right one.
Yeah. They used to have some issues in installing. I remember what it was. Something we were installing that if it didn't complete and you didn't do the reboot and it didn't work right, then you tried to install it again. It says, "Oh, there's already one in progress. Finish that one first." Well, it wouldn't finish. You had to go into the registry and say, "I didn't do this. This one's not running." So you'll run into situations like that. Yeah. So you had the DVD that was in there, what, 673 times or something like that?
Yeah.
And it couldn't find. We kind of had an issue with that, and I'll keep telling stories because we're learning more and more and more about this new machine. It's got like 8 nicks in it. Well, when I go into the VM, the piece of software that we use to manage on it, you tell it to connect to localhost, which is really cool, and it would start stuff up, but it wouldn't show me the console of the machine when I clicked on it. So it couldn't connect, so connecting to the server, no connection to server. They've got 8 nicks. It didn't know what localhost was, and only 2 of them have IP addresses. So you tell which IP address to connect to. Kind of had maybe a little bit of a similar situation with the web interface, because you go into the drop-down, it says all of the IP addresses that are on this thing. Well, one of them is on the public exposure, one of them is a private gigabit connection that goes to the iSCSI. Which one? Go specify the address. So, and those kinds of things are going to be in there. And that's what happens with the registry. If it gets so many of it, it doesn't know which one to use. You've got to give it a little more specific instruction when you do those things. The security configuration wizard, one of the last things, and there's an activity to look at that to actually create a template for this thing. Security configuration wizard has simplified trying to create what's called a bastion host. a machine that only exposes the ports, the resources that need to be exposed, whatever is actually running on it. If I have a web server, it's only going to do like 80 and 443 or whatever else we need there. And then if I add another service like a remote desktop, it may open port 3389. But it's going to restrict the number of ports that are available on the system. It is a GUI. The command line SCW Security Wizards command should start it for you. It should also be in the administrative tools that you can start it through the GUI. But do that one, create a new security policy. What are you going to do with this thing? Do what that activity says, because if you get really crazy with this thing, you may restrict it more than you intend to restrict it. But what it does is set the system up to allow it to be the function that it's supposed to be. PowerShell, script file of commands, and what it said yesterday, it said commandlets, what was it, 130 or 131 commandlets in it. More powerful DOS prompt, really. A way to think. It's not really what it is, but it's a kind of a way to think of what it is. It's a Microsoft script. I guess it's not really a scripting language. When I say that, I'm thinking batch files. Much more powerful than batch files. Easier to use than the WMI scripting, I think. Honest to goodness, Perl probably one of the simplest script languages to use. This gives you more power at the command line. If you're using the core install, it's also going to give you more ability to do the things that you need to do. Install PowerShell is one of the services that you have to go back, not put on by default. It's on by default, I think, in the Windows 7 machines. If it's not there, you have to go add it as a service, but you add it as one of the services in the server machine. It's not going to be there by default. It's something that you probably, well, for the activities at least, you're going to want to, and it's something that if you're going to do a whole lot of Windows management, you really want to know about it, because it will, in a large scale, simplify your life. The things that we do stuff at the GUI really easy. Make 12 users. Yeah, you're going to use the GUI. Okay, now you want to make 600 users. How long is it going to take you, and how many typos are you going to make? How long is it going to take you to make 600 users through the GUI with no typos? That's the kicker, with no typos. The other thing about scripting is you got to have a database file of some sort. And the one that what Chris uses, and I don't think he uses the Perl script anymore, we used Perl script for years, is when you enroll, and this is why Trevor's username's wrong, because of a typo from whoever enrolled you. It goes all the way back to there. We get the database out of the campus database, which has got hundreds of fields in it, and strip it down to like 8, and then use that to create the Active Directory account, and that's where your username comes from. And then when you log on for the very first time, there's a script runs that you actually create your home directory. So scripting is a handy thing to have, to know how to do. PowerShell is a version of scripting that makes these servers more efficient. So in this one, the Server Manager and ServerManager is the big thing. Server Manager Command.exe, command line, know about it. If you're doing the core install, you're going to know how to use it with that, because that's how you're going to add roles, things like that to it. Tune performance, configuring the processor, schedule memory use, virtual memory, those types of things. You need to know they're there. But if you run into a situation like I just described this one with a lot of memory, then it says, oh, the page file is based on the memory size. And when one-time memory, well, golly, that really took an awful lot of disk space. It didn't need to go away from a machine that had a lot of memory. Power options, configure those, and look at what's on your server, what gets shut down, what the system wants to shut down for you. You may or may not want those things to happen. Control panel to use to install and uninstall protocols. What protocols do you want? What protocols do you need? TCP/IP is the one that's by default, including IPv6 is installed by default. You probably don't want to put my commercial in here for IPv6. You probably don't want to take it off because Windows actually uses that for some of the functionality within the network. Doesn't take anything away from it, doesn't cost you anything, so you might as well just leave it on. And eventually we're going to go to IPv6 anyway, eventually being sometime within the next 20 years, I'm guessing. I do these courses, I go to some of these courses and they're rolling and they say, oh, we're going to be on IPv6 within the next year, and and it's like a 2002 course. We're going to imminently go to IPv6 for about the last 10 years. Eventually we will. The registry we looked at it, just be careful with it. The security configuration wizard is something that you really do need to know about to protect yourself when you put machines into the DMZ. Is it a big deal inside your private network? I guess the answer is maybe. Depends on how many people are trying to make you look bad. May or may not be an issue inside your private network. I think inside our private network it kind of becomes an issue with you guys after you've done, if you feel rambunctious after the security classes. We really haven't had any big issues with that because not a good thing to do. PowerShell, you need to know about it. You need to learn how to use it, particularly for the functions that you're going to use it for a lot. It is a more powerful tool that's been put into the system. And with that, do you have questions? Probably just want a break, don't you? Going once, going twice. Let's take a break and got lab time. A lot of lab time today.